Anna, take it away.
Yes, okay, welcome everyone. This is the event called People Against Empire, Resistance in Palestine, Iran, Kashmir, and the Balkans, hosted by Balkan Solidarity Network. We're going to give people 1 or 2 minutes to join, and then we'll start our discussion. Thank you for being here. Okay, so I think maybe we'll get started. That's okay with everyone. Okay, so welcome once again. My name is Anna Milosavljevic. I'm in Belgrade, Serbia, but I was born in the US, hence my accent. I'm part of the Balkan Solidarity Network and really excited to have this conversation as part of our day of about connecting struggles. The last in a series of conversations today. The earlier two were really, really full of knowledge and yeah, just really inspiring. So we'll release recordings of those two later. That was the Feminist Solidarity panel earlier today, as well as the Migratory Justice panel. So make sure you follow Balkan Solidarity on Instagram and anywhere else. Okay, so just to kick it off, I'm going to give some very brief introductory remarks just to kind of begin the conversation, and then I will briefly give some bios of our speakers. And the way that this conversation will work is for the first hour or so, we will each of the speakers will talk a little bit about their respective regions and anti-imperialism in context of those regions and those struggles. And then we'll open it up, and we want to make sure that everyone else on this call also has the opportunity to, explain their own analyses and thoughts on anti-imperialism, whether it's, specific to their own region or a question for someone else, anything like that. So that's how it'll work. And okay, just to start off this conversation, which, as I mentioned, is titled People Against Empire, right? So today we're going to be talking about imperialism, what different manifestations of imperialism across the globe look like, which is why we've engaged speakers from various parts of the world to learn about where those struggles intersect and where they differ. So I just wanted to start off this conversation a little bit with, I think, some important kind of context for the discussion, which is, what is imperialism, right? It's a term thrown around a lot, and I think there are very obvious expressions of imperialism that many of us here recognize and are easy to spot. For example, currently the forced starvation of Palestinians or the carpet bombing of Gaza. One of the most extreme, right, and horrifying examples of imperialism. But I think it's much deeper than that. And so I'm hoping that today we can get into some of those differences in the ways that imperialism shows itself, in the ways that, again, it expresses, manifests itself. Because I just want to quote this military theorist, Clausewitz, a Prussian military theorist, who said that war is politics by other means. And I think that's a really important quote when we're thinking about how to analyze imperialism and how, therefore, we can struggle and better resist imperialism. I did also want to highlight, for example, a few days ago, there was a study by the Lancet Journal, which I think some people we might be familiar with, which did a study about sanctions imposed by the US or the European Union from 1971 until 2021, were associated with over 500,000 deaths annually, which is, you know, much, much higher than the annual number of direct battle-related casualties that they assess, which is around 100,000 deaths. So this is, of course, only to prove the point, right, that imperialism is not just direct boots on the ground, direct bombs, but is indirect via economic sanctions, via economic weaponry that is used by imperialist powers to inflict suffering upon people in order to achieve specific strategic geopolitical goals. So, just to say, these are very clear examples of imperialism, right? But I think it's important to also highlight what the roots are of this, right? Because as Lenin said, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. So to understand imperialism, we have to also understand capitalism because if war is the highest manifestation or the highest expression of politics and imperialism is the highest form of capitalism, then what does that indicate about the foundation at which these issues lie? Okay, and then just wrapping up my intro remarks, and then I will go into the bios of our speakers, and then I will hand it to Etaf. Okay, yes, so through this discussion, we are going to learn about Palestinian, Iranian, Kashmiri, and struggles in the Balkans against these forces that profit from oppression, exploitation, domination, and we seek to, of course, highlight similarities in these struggles because, we're here to connect struggles. So, for example, we will talk a little bit about the similarities between settler colonialism in Palestine and Kashmir, but then we'll also highlight the very important differences that we can learn from and discuss how we can better stand in solidarity with different struggles around the world. Today we have four other speakers alongside myself. First is Etaf Abdelrahman, who worked as a social worker at a high school in the Gaza Strip until she was forced to leave due to the ongoing genocide against the Palestinians by the Zionist occupation. She now lives in Slovenia and collaborates with various civil society organizations. And she will, Summer Zughul will be translating and interpreting for Etaf. And Summer is a political scientist, intercultural researcher, and community arts worker whose work focuses on feminist, queer, and decolonial activism. So they will be speaking about Palestine in the context of people against empire. Next, we will have Sima Shakshari, who is a member of Educators for Justice in Palestine, also a member of No Wars, No Sanctions in Iran, and a professor at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And lastly, we'll be joined by Umer, who is a Kashmiri journalist based in Srinagar, and whose work focuses on political activism, gender, human rights in South Asia. His writings have appeared in several national and international magazines. So with that, I will hand it over to Etaf and Summer, who will start the discussion off about the struggle in Palestine.
عطاف أظني هاي ما في داعي أترجمها، هي بس عرفت عن حالك وعرفت عن باقي المشتركات
نعم
والمشتركين
إيه.
تعرفيهم أنت، والآن
نعم.
المجال لإلك إنك تتحدثي عن مداخلتك.
هعمل سرد سريع، أنا مش هغوص كتير بتفاصيل. طبعا أنا حابة أقول إنه قطاع غزة هاي المكان الصغير التي لا تتجاوز مساحته 365 كيلو متر مربع، عدد سكانه 2 مليون و300 ألف نسمة، حيث يعتبر أعلى نسبة كثافة سكانية في العالم. ترجم ولا أكفي؟
لا بترجم.
يقع على الساحل الشرقي للبحر المتوسط. هذا الموقع المهم جدا جغرافيا وسياسيا، حيث يعتبر بوابة العبور بين نقطة عبور تاريخية أكسبته أهمية استراتيجية كبيرة. من الناحية الاقتصادية لدى قطاع غزة إمكانيات كبيرة وهائلة غير مستغلة بسبب الحصار الإسرائيلي المستمر أكثر من 20 عاما. لديه طاقات بشرية كبيرة، نسبة الشباب هي الأعلى بين سكانه. زادت أهمية قطاع. نعم.
So first, Itaf is starting her intervention with a reintroduction of Gaza. So Gaza, with the space of around 365 kilometers, with around 3 million population, it is one of the most populated areas in the world. It is located in the Mediterranean Sea, with a very strategic location that is very important since long time, and it has a lot of economic potentials which was not used by its population due to the Zionist siege on Gaza for more than 20 years.
زادت أهمية القطاع بعد اكتشاف لحقول الغاز الكبيرة مقابل شواطئه. هذا ما جعل كل العيون ونظرة الدول الاستعمارية والإمبريالية أنها تحط قطاع غزة في مقدمة أولوياتها. سنة 1948 عام النكبة قامت إسرائيل بطرد الفلسطينيين من أراضيهم إلى قطاع غزة، وتمركزوا في 8 كامبات في قطاع غزة. بعد احتلال إسرائيل لقطاع غزة عام 67 بدأت تتشكل حركات المقاومة في قطاع غزة اليسارية والقومية، منها حركة فتح، الجبهة الشعبية لتحرير فلسطين، الجبهة الديمقراطية، وهذه الحركات كانت تقود الكفاح المسلح في ذلك الوقت. ترجمي سمر.
So Gaza became even more important, and all the eyes were on Gaza after the discovery of gas fields. The imperialist forces and the imperial governments, they put the spot on Gaza because they want to have access to exploit these gas resources. In 1948, during the Nakba, the Zionist occupation was displacing the Palestinians to go to Gaza, expelling them from the other occupied territories of Palestine to Gaza. And there they were inhabiting Gaza into 8 sections. In 1967, the military resistance in Gaza started to take part mostly through leftist movements like Fatah and also the Liberation Front for the Liberation of Palestinians. And they started the militarized resistance against the Zionist occupation. So many leftist mobilization, including these ones.
في الثمانينات ظهرت حركات ذات طابع إسلامي، حركة حماس، حركة الجهاد الإسلامي، وكلها كان لها دور كبير في العمليات ضد الاحتلال الإسرائيلي. بعد اتفاق
in the 80s, the Islamic resistance started to emerge. So in the 1967, it was leftist and then secular mostly. And then the Islamists in the 80s, like Fatah, like also Islam jihadism, started to emerge in the 80s. And they also played an important role in the resistance.
بعد اتفاق أوسلو حدث انقسام سياسي بين السلطة الفلسطينية وحماس التي رفضت هذا الاتفاق، وسيطرت حماس على قطاع غزة بعد صراع داخلي كبير، وقادت حماس والجهاد المواجهات المتكررة مع الاحتلال، سواء من خلال المسيرات أو إطلاق الصواريخ. في الصعيد الثاني اجتياحات كبيرة من قبل الجانب الإسرائيلي لقطاع غزة.
It was after the Oslo Agreement that Hamas had a segregation and a conflict with the Palestinian authorities. And this disagreement led to Hamas taking over Gaza siege and getting into direct militarized conflict, like confrontation with the Zionist occupation through different militarized means.
خلال 10 أو 12 سنة الماضية شنت إسرائيل أكبر 5 حروب على قطاع غزة، بالإضافة لعشرات جولات التصعيد الصغيرة، كان آخرها 7 أكتوبر 2023، والتي استمرت الحرب لسنتين تقريبا بدون توقف إلى الآن.
During the 10 to 12 years, the Zionist occupation did major wars on Gaza. حكايتي 6 حروب صح؟
5 حروب.
5 حروب. 5 wars in Gaza the Zionist occupation made. And the latest was the one on 7th of October 2023, which is going on since almost 2 years.
إسرائيل قامت بقتل 60,000 ما يقارب من 60,000 شخص، شردت وسجنت وأصابت ما يقارب 200,000 شخص في قطاع غزة، 70% منهم من النساء والأطفال.
The Zionist occupation in the most recent attack on Gaza killed around 60,000 people. This is the recorded officially. 200,000 people being arrested, displaced, and harmed in several means. 70% of these people are women and children.
17,500 طفل تم قتلهم من قبل إسرائيل.
17,500 children were killed by the Zionist regime.
دمرت 95% من المدارس ومؤسسات التعليم، أي ما يقارب 400 مدرسة.
They demolished 95% of the schools and educational institutions, which is around 400 schools.
أعدمت 18 جامعة ومعهد تعليم عالي.
They executed 18 universities and higher educational institutions.
إسرائيل أعدمت 90% من مستشفيات قطاع غزة حسب منظمة الصحة العالمية، من بينها كبرى المستشفيات اللي سمعتوها على التلفاز، الشفاء والأهلي والأندونيسي وغيرهم.
According to the World Health Organization, the Zionist regime has demolished 90% of the hospitals in Gaza, including the major hospitals that maybe you have heard about it in the news, like Hospital Al-Shifa.
قتلت ما لا يقل عن 1500 من الكوادر الطبية، أطباء، ممرضين، فنيين.
At least 1,500 medical staff have been executed by the Zionist regime.
310 منهم تم قتلهم في السجون الإسرائيلية.
310 of them, of this medical staff, have been executed, killed by the Zionist regime in the Zionist prisons, so while being arrested.
المثل يعني بدي أقول لهم عن شخصية واحدة أكيد كلهم سمعوا عنها، الدكتور حسام، مستشفى كمال عدوان في الشمال، اللي هلأ تحت التعذيب في السجون الإسرائيلية.
One of them, maybe you heard about them, Dr. Hussam Shafa, is right now, till this moment, being tortured in the Zionist prisons.
إسرائيل قتلت أكثر من 220 صحفي حسب نقابة الصحفيين.
According to the journalist syndicate, Zionist regime killed more than 220 journalists.
جعلت غزة أخطر بيئة في العالم لممارسة الصحافة.
The Zionist regime made Gaza the most dangerous place on the whole world for journalism.
إسرائيل منعت الصحافة العالمية للدخول لغزة. جميع الصحفيين الأجانب، جميع محطات الإذاعة والتلفزيونات الأجانب، القنوات الأجنبية، لأنها بتعرف إنه المصداقية للعالم من قبل الصحفي الأجنبي، وليس هناك مصداقية للصحفي الفلسطيني.
The Zionist regime forbade international media channels, international journalists, all kind of international journalism from entering Gaza. They forbid them from entering Gaza because they know that the word will have more credibility for a foreign journalist more than for a Palestinian journalist. This is why they forbade the international journalism from entering Gaza.
يعني مع الحظ، يعني ليس شطارة منا ولكن حظا إنه مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي عم تنقل الحرب أونلاين. هذه أول حرب في التاريخ يتم نقلها أونلاين. المجزرة ترتكبها إسرائيل في نفس اللحظة. نتفرج على المجازر والمقتولين والمذبوحين في غزة أمام عيون ونظر كل العالم.
Nevertheless, the ongoing genocide is being streamed and reported live online via all social media means and streams. This is the first genocide worldwide, first time in the history that a genocide is taking place, and we don't read about it after it happens, but we are watching it live as it happens in the second. We are watching it via live streams.
قدرت أطنان المتفجرات التي ضربتها إسرائيل على قطاع غزة ب6 قنابل نووية من نوع هيروشيما وناجازاكي.
The estimation of the amount of bombs that the Zionist regime throw on Gaza is estimated of 6 bombs as a nuclear bombs of Hiroshima, as an example.
أليست الإمبريالية تتمثل في الدعم الأمريكي والأوروبي الغير مشروط والمفتوح لإسرائيل المعتدية والظالمة والتي تعتدي وتضرب قطاع غزة وتضرب المدنيين والأطفال والنساء؟
Present imperialism is the unconditional support from the European Union and the United States, the unconditional support for the ongoing criminal Zionist regime to do its wars and its crimes on the people of Palestine. Isn't this what imperialism means? The unconditional support to such a criminal regime.
لم يكن دور الحركات المقاومة الفلسطينية ضد الاحتلال الإسرائيلي فقط، بل كانت ضد النفوذ الإمبريالي الأوسع والذي يحاول السيطرة على المنطقة.
The resistance movements in Palestine was never only about the occupation that Israel is doing. It has been from the beginning, from it started, it has been clearly against the imperialist greed and the imperialist forces who are trying to exploit more and more people and resources in the whole region.
مثلا على سبيل المثال حركة فتح والمنظمات اليسارية تبنوا فكرة النضال القومي التحرري ضد الاستعمار والهيمنة الغربية. اعتبروا أن الاحتلال الإسرائيلي هو جزء لا يتجزأ من النظام الإمبريالي العالمي.
For example, the movement of Fatah and the leftist secular Palestinian resistance have adopted clearly from the beginning and publicly that they are a decolonial movement. They are a movement for the liberation and self-determination of people on the ground from the imperialist greed and against all the imperialist plans for control.
أما حركات الإسلام السياسي مثل حماس والجهاد الإسلامي، رغم تركيزهم على مقاومة الاحتلال إلا أنهم رفضوا التدخلات الغربية والإمبريالية في شؤون المنطقة، ويعتبرون المقاومة جزء لا يتجزأ من تحرير الأمة من الهيمنة الأجنبية.
When it comes to the Islamic political movements, for example, Hamas and the Islamist jihadis, for them, they refused all kind of foreign interference. So they are against the Israeli occupation forces, and they refuse all kind of foreign interference, and they are for the total liberation and self-determination of people on the ground from foreign forces.
الكل متفق على أن المقاومة ليست تحرير الأرض فحسب، ولكن مواجهة للسياسات التي تحاول تقويض السيادة الوطنية وتحويل فلسطين لساحة.
صوتك قطع. تحويل فلسطين لإيش؟
تحويل فلسطين لساحة نفوذ أجنبي وإمبريالي.
Okay. The resistance in Palestine, with all its faces, with all of its directions, they are agreeing that the resistance in Palestine is for the liberation from all kind of foreign control, and the resistance in Palestine is to liberate Palestine from becoming a field for war between foreign forces and for the fulfillment of imperial greed.
نحن كشعب فلسطيني وكحركات مقاومة في فلسطين وفي قطاع غزة تحديدا، نكن كل الاحترام والشكر لجميع الحركات النضالية التي تدعم النضال الفلسطيني وتؤمن بالقضية الفلسطينية، سواء في دول البلقان، سواء في دول أوروبا، سواء في أمريكا. واتضح كل الدعم وكل المساندة لنضالنا الفلسطيني من خلال ما ترونه من مظاهرات ومن احتجاجات ومن اعتصامات ومن حركات طلابية وحركة مثقفين. شكرا شكرا للجميع، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
And at the end, I conclude that me as a Palestinian and we as people, Palestinian people in Palestine and everywhere, we hold a deep appreciation for all the movements who are facing and resisting oppression, and for all the movements who are in solidarity with our common cause for free Palestine and for the self-determination and liberation of Palestinian people. And the recent ongoing genocide in Gaza have showed the big and unconditional solidarity from humans to humans, like the students' collectives and the student movements everywhere in this world. And we appreciate all the movements in United States, in America, in even in America, everywhere that is supporting the end of this injustice.
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Etaf. Shukran and shukran, Samar.
شكرا.
Thank you very much. So now we will move on to Seema, who's an Iranian living in the United States, who will speak a little bit about the recent attacks on Iran, as well as the impact of sanctions, and tie together the Iranian struggle against imperialism with the Palestinian struggle for self-determination, and how we can foster more solidarity for both of these struggles. So, Seema, with that, hand it to you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you to the Balkan Solidarity Network for inviting me and for organizing this. And thank you, Etaf, for that very
You're welcome.
full talk. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Imnizaska or St. Paul in Minnesota, the Dakota land, the past and present, current Dakota land, and I live not too far from Fort Snelling, a site where Dakota peoples were forced to march on foot in the coldest months here in Minnesota to a camp in Fort Snelling and imprisoned in the camp. And many Dakota men were lynched. And of course, many women, children, and men lost their lives. So we see that there are, of course, repeated patterns in dispossession of the empire or empire's dispossession of indigenous land, and also what we see in Palestine and have been seeing since 1948 in Palestine by the
Sorry,
Israeli.
just to note, I think for all speakers to just make pauses so Samar can also translate for
Let me
Etaf.
finish this sentence. And the Israeli settler colonial state. Sorry about that. Go ahead. So, as you all know, Israel attacked Iran on June 13th, several Iranian cities, and sent bombers and also missiles. And for 12 days, Israel killed over 1,000 Iranians. And of course, in that period that Israel attacked Iran, it also killed 820 people in Gaza. And of course, this attack was unprovoked. Israel had no reason to attack Iran, but it brought the excuse that Iran is developing nuclear weapons and that it poses an existential threat to Israel and to the region.
زي ما صار بالعراق بالضبط.
I thought saying like happened in Iraq.
So as I said, this is of course ironic because Iran has not attacked any country in the past 100 years or so, but Israel has attacked 5 countries just in the past year. Israel owns 90 nuclear weapons. Iran has none. The Security Council has investigated Iran's nuclear sites over the years, over and over, and has found no weapon-grade uranium enrichment. And even the U.S. intelligence services reported as recent as this March to Trump that Iran does not have any weapons-grade uranium, nor does it have the intention to build one. So the question is, why now? Why did Israel attack Iran right 2 days before the Iranian and the U.S. Officials were supposed to sit down and negotiate? I want to propose that the timing of the attack, the Israeli attack on Iran, has to do with the occupation and the genocide in Gaza, and also Gazification of the West Bank. As you recall, right after Iran retaliated, and by the UN Charter 59, Article 51, Iran has every right to attack or in self-defense after it's provoked. So after Iran setting Israel, Israel blocked all borders in the West Bank and intensified its attacks on the people of West Bank.
بس بدي كمان أزيد في هاي النقطة إنه كمان صدر عن الكنيست إنه قرار بضم الضفة الغربية إلى إسرائيل.
She wants to add that during also the Zionist bombing on Iran, the Zionist Knesset, the Israeli Knesset, announced a decision to annex West Bank to Israel.
Exactly. That's what I was about to say, that this is also a plan of annexation of the West Bank, which we see that Israel is working on right now. So, of course, Israel and the U.S. have been provoking Iran over and over, from the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the killing of Sayyid Nasrallah in Lebanon, the bombing of Iranian embassy in Syria, which is practically Iranian soil, and the assassination of Iranian scientists. And Iran has been kind of deflecting, and not because Iran doesn't want a war or didn't want a war, but this time Israel went and attacked many Iranian cities and persistently for 12 days, and basically sent evacuation orders to Iranian people in different cities, and also the proxies, Israeli proxies from within Iran, started bombing, placing bombs, and also sending drones for targeted attacks within Iran. But what we see now is that Israel, basically right before the negotiations, did this despite that they had been provoking Iran, and Iran did not really respond in a way to create a war. If you want to translate this part, I'll go to talk about how this is related to sanctions.
No.
Of course, Iran's revolution of 1979 basically caused a lot of anxiety for the state of Israel and the U.S. And since then, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on Iran. There hasn't been a time since the revolution that there haven't been sanctions on Iran. Of course, they have gotten worse and tightened in different times for different excuses. And the worst sanctions pretty much before Trump happened was in 2009, what Obama called crippling sanctions, and by bullying Iran, basically forced them to reduce their nuclear activities and pass the JCPOA, the Joint Complete Plan of Action, which relieved some of the sanctions. But then after Trump came to power, the U.S. withdrew from the sanctions and even made them even worse. And Biden continued those sanctions despite his promises to lift the sanctions if he became president, and then Trump continues those sanctions again. And of course, these sanctions on Iran are imposed not despite the claims, not because of human rights, not because of freeing Iranian women or Iranian people. They're not because of Iran's nuclear activities. As I said, there is no, the UN Security Council over and over has investigated and said that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. These are for the empire's interests. And in fact, the first sanctions on Iran were imposed in 1953 when during Mohammad Mossadegh, the democratically elected Iranian Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, who was then removed by a US-backed coup, the US imposed sanctions because of the nationalization of oil in 1953 in Iran. And then after 1973, there have been sanctions on Iran consistently. And what these sanctions do, and as we saw in the case of Iraq as well, the sanctions don't really hurt the elites. They don't hurt the state. They hurt the most vulnerable segments of the population. We saw that in Iraq, and we are seeing that in Iran right now. And what these sanctions do also, exactly because of the dire economic situations, they create discontent within the society. So we see sanctions on Iran over decades now have really, really devastated the Iranian economy and has pushed people into poverty and created competition. So when we see the anti-Afghan sentiments in Iran right now, it is exactly because of the idea that the economy is so bad. And of course, those who get scapegoated are the most vulnerable members of the society, such as refugees and immigrants, in this case, Afghan immigrants. We have seen how the sanctions have created environmental catastrophe in Iran because the Iranian state, after Obama's sanctions, could not send its oil to be refined outside. So it created its own homegrown industries. That meant that the Iranian fuel that went into people's homes and also cars creates 10 to 800% more toxins, carcinogenic toxins, than the international standards. We see how the sanctions have created the situation, because sanctions are a war by another name. So when a state is operating under the conditions of war, it increases its security measures, which means that the Iranian state, using sanctions as an excuse because of the collusion with the foreign elements, has been cracking down on the genuine movements in Iran, whether it is the labor movements, the workers' movements, whether it is the movement for environmental justice, whether it has been women's movements. The sanctions have given the Iranian state the ammunition to crack down on people's protests, and of course, protests that have to do with how sanctions have contributed to the creation of these discontents. Of course, this is the opportunity that the empire takes to create, to rule through divide and conquer strategies. When the society basically is weakened, exactly, social solidarity is weakened because of the competition for resources, because of the horrible economic situation. We saw that Israel basically used this opportunity to hire Iranians and some Afghan immigrants within Iran to pay them to and use them as proxies. And Israel, just recently I was watching how the state of Israel's propaganda machine, the IOF soldier who speaks Farsi, was provoking Iranian people by saying, oh, the Iranian state cares more about Lebanese than it does, or Palestinians or Lebanese than it does for its own people. They paid $14,000 to people of Lebanon whose houses were demolished, but they gave only 8 million tumans, which is much less, to Iranians. So you judge who the state cares more for. So they're creating this idea that they're projecting basically their own settler colonial violence on the Iranian state, calling the Iranian state foreigners. They're saying that they have occupied Iran, whereas Israel is the occupation force. They're creating a divide, not just between the state and the people, but also among the Iranian people themselves. So this is the strategies. And of course, we saw, because of millions of dollars that the US, since the September 11, 2001, has spent in propaganda in Iran, and in my book I write about it, and the state of Israel's use of propaganda in Iran, we see over the years that the Iranian people, who have, for as long as I remember, have had solidarity with the people of Palestine, have, we saw slogans such as نه غزه نه ایران جانم فدای ایران, meaning neither Gaza nor Lebanon, I sacrifice my life for Iran, which points to basically Iranian people's discontents, not having economic resources, and having this idea that rather than helping its own people, the Iranian state is sending money to Hamas or Hezbollah in Gaza and Lebanon. So these divide and conquer strategies are exactly... And Yemen too, yes. How Israel and Lebanon, of course, and Syria as well, how US and Israel have been using this divide and conquer strategies to basically not only create discontent within the people of Iran, but also pit the people of Iran and people of Gaza or people of Lebanon or people of Yemen against each other.
Itaf is also emphasizing the proxies that you mentioned, of how people are recruited as well within this propaganda and the sanctions to deliver and to channel information.
Of course, the proxies and the blame that the state and the people are, some people are putting on Afghan people is misplaced. It is really the U.S. wars that have forced millions of Afghan people to have to leave their country to come to Iran and to live in dire economic situation. And it is the U.S. sanctions on Iran that has created this situation. So rather than blaming the Afghan people, I think we need to build solidarities rather than putting the blame on people of Gaza or Lebanon for draining Iran's resources. We need to build solidarities and actually put the blame where it belongs, which is the U.S. empire and the Israeli expansionist projects. And I want to end by saying that actually the U.S.-Israeli plans of regime change through bombings really backfired, because we saw the people of Iran, regardless of their opposition to the Iranian state, unify and say that no matter what, we will not allow Israel or the U.S. to take Iran's land, and we will defend. You saw people without hijab, women without hijab, who were carrying Iranian flags and saying death to Israel, and marching against the Israeli attacks and occupation. So I think the ceasefire was really because they saw that their plan is backfiring, and actually rather than an easy regime change where they drop some bombs and then the Iranian people will have an uprising, they saw that no, it is actually the opposite of that. They're unifying the Iranian people. So I think our solidarity at this point is more important than any other time in the history, exactly because how the U.S. and Israeli empire, the U.S. empire and Israeli settler colonial project and expansionist project are counting on creating discontent and pitting our peoples against each other. And it is more than ever important that we stand in solidarity, and more than ever important to stand against the forced starvation of people in Gaza and of the genocide of the people in Gaza. And of course, we need to make connections also, those of us who live in the US, to how these wars are affecting us. While we see cuts on healthcare, the one big, beautiful bill that Trump has passed, attacks on workers, attacks on healthcare, attacks on education, while each bomber that the US sent to Iran took $2.1 billion, and the cost of flying each of those B-2 stealth bombers was around 150,000 an hour. And each bomb that they dropped, and they dropped 12 of them on Iran's nuclear sites, is worth $5 million. So $60 million in bombs on Iran. That money should be going to education here in the US, to people who are houseless, to workers, to indigenous people who are sleeping here in Minneapolis on the streets, and they're being displaced from one place to another exactly because of the neoliberal policies of the state. And we need to ask for divestment from Israeli companies in the US. We need to ask for divestment at our university to divest from Israeli companies and weapons manufacturing companies. And it is only then, when we stand up in solidarity with the people of Palestine and the people of Iran, people of Afghanistan, people of Iraq, people of Yemen, people of Syria, people of Lebanon, that we can really crumble the empire. And the work that the people in the US need to do, rather than trying to save women in Afghanistan or women in Iran, they need to really challenge their own government, and they have to stop the US wars in the region, and also the US support of the murderous and genocidal state of Israel.
شكرا على الدعم الإيراني للقضية الفلسطينية، شكرا على وقفة إيران مع قطاع غزة، شكرا كتير.
I think this does not need translation, but yes, Itaf is thanking the solidarity movements in Iran with Palestine, and for everyone in Iran supporting the Palestinian liberation.
And I just
Thank you
want
so much.
to say that if there is going to be any change in the Iranian state, it cannot come from the US or Israel, because neither the US or Israel want the well-being of the Iranian people. They're only interested in geopolitical domination in the region, and also the interest. And because of Iran's role in the axis of resistance, Iran poses a threat. When we see that Iran is surrounded pretty much by US military bases everywhere, and Iran's basically position is posing a threat. But if there's going to be any change in the Iranian state, it has to come from the people. And of course, the Iranian people's movements, genuine movements for labor justice, for environmental justice, for women's rights, students' rights, has to come from Iran. And we don't need Israel or the US to come and rescue the Iranian people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to Sima for that wonderful overview. And I just want to say, because we are almost at time, it's 7:20 here, and we have until around 8. So we're going to move on now to our next speaker, Omer from Kashmir. But before that, I want to just ask maybe Summer, if for this next section, if it's okay to maybe do like summary instead of direct translation, just because of time. I don't know if that's possible.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so yes, without further ado, just going to introduce Kashmiri journalist Omer, who's going to talk about the struggle in Kashmir. And I know that for myself, and I think for a lot of people, we are less familiar with the history of the Kashmiri liberation struggle. So he will give some more insight onto that. And then he will also tie together that struggle with the struggle against imperialism, against British imperialism, American imperialism, and as well similarities with the Palestinian struggle. So I will stop here and hand it over to Omer.
Yeah, hi. Am I audible?
Hi.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much for organizing this event, and especially PSN and Anna for inviting me. So before I begin, I just want to give you the overview of the region that I basically belong from. So Kashmir is a place. It's a valley, and it's a landlocked region that's like bordering east by China, and to west it has Pakistan, and to east uh, it has India. All three of them like have portion of the region. India almost have like 38% of the territory, and the rest Pakistan and China almost 60 odd percent. So like so I want you to imagine a place like which is around 55,000 square kilometers. So in that region, it's quite smaller in terms of, because it's a valley. Most of it is has a mountainous region. So in this region, you have almost 16 million population, which is basically Kashmiris, and of which right now 7 million, 7 lakh, which is like 0.7 million Indian soldiers are there, and they are occupying almost 70,000 acres of land. So like imagine a situation wherein like you are around almost every time, soldiers, and consider yourself citizen that has seen like years of political turmoil, where you are seen as a suspicion, like someone. Indian state has a lot of suspicion considering the history, like ever since 1947 when India and Pakistan got divided. So this portion, there was a dispute on this portion because of its history, because prior to that it was Maharajas who were kind of, they had borrowed it from Britishers, and giving them some meager amount of money. And after that, this region kind of got consolidated and it was taken over. And since Maharaja, who was controlling this region, he was quite apprehensive about whether he wanted to go with India and Pakistan, because it was like this entire region got divided within a very swift, and this Maharaja was quite reluctant to decide whether he wants to be with India and Pakistan. So there are many, many argue kind of, because he was a Maharaja and he was kind of occupying a lot of land. So he was a bit apprehensive about whether he wanted to sign, go with India. So in that, there was this Jammu province wherein a massacre took place. So this massacre has had a recent serious impact for the population, because number of people got displaced and number of people were also got killed. So this massacre, quite often we don't usually see a lot of mention in the mainstream media. And because of this massacre, and Indian state had a quite a bad experience while controlling the region, because a portion of it, because of this massacre, Punch rebellion that took off 1947, uh, because of it Indian state had to kind of sign a deal with the whosoever was controlling. It was Sheikh Abdullah. So a portion of it got divided and it was taken over by Pakistan and then by India. And for decades, like there was, Indian side had promised that they're going to have a referendum, a sort of self-determination for people to decide for themselves whether they want to continue living with India or whether they want to stay with Pakistan or independent. So ever since
Sorry,
1947,
maybe
so
just soon maybe pause so Summer can just quickly translate if you want now or in a bit, just let me know.
Okay. I thought
تمام.
so yeah, so like because I want to discuss a lot of history, so I'm just like quite summarizing it. So like for decades there was like a peaceful sort of a Indian the local leadership kind of wanted have more autonomy and wanted to like have a at least a right to self determination, which Indian state kind of denied for decades. And eventually like late 1989 afterwards, there was like sort of militant rebellion against Indian state. And because of it, and thousands of people got killed, thousands of people got displaced as well. And then afterwards 2000 onwards, people sort of decide that now Indian state is kind of launching counterinsurgency, and because of it a lot of people are getting killed. So people decided to protest peacefully, and hitting the streets in lakhs. And 2008 onward they were like summer agitation that took off in 2008. 2009 there was also a smaller like agitation, and afterward 2010, and after 2010 2016, when some of the people who were local in and local, they had taken up arms. So they it was quite odd to the late earlier this armed rebellion that was taking off, because in armed rebellion you don't show faces, but these bunch of people, they were coming up on social media, they were showing faces, and because of it there was a social like decent mobilization that was happening on social media. And of which like when this guy he was around 21 when he was killed, Burhan Wani. After he was killed, as like Kashmir entirely, it was a summer agitation that took off for almost 7 months. So right after 2016 onwards, so Indian side sort of decided that they wanted to change the status quo, and because of they changed the status quo in 2019 by abrogating the some special laws that kind of sort gave autonomy to autonomous sort of rights in terms of towards the land as well as to jobs. So 2019 it was like right after BJP came in power, so they had this already the agenda that they want to abrogate the article 370, and give kind of integrate the entire Kashmir to Indian to Indian side. So right after 2019, since Indian sides changed the status quo, and within local population there was this fear that they since the Indian state has changed the laws, and it kind of invoked fear within population. That was about the demographic change, that Indian state is actually they have this agenda of changing the demography, and also about this land disposition within population, that within masses, they kind sort of felt that thousands of people are now applying for the domicile, which is basically now they'll get all the rights which previously were like kind of limited to Kashmiris, and which basically will sort of bring Hindu settlers. So if I
Yes, perfect. Go ahead, Summer.
فهو عم
yeah, so the because of the changes that Indian state kind of brought right after 2019, like many people have kind of drawn this similarities that since Palestine has also faced it long back. So like Indian state is kind of borrowing the the tactics that they have Israel has adopted in Palestine. uh, in terms of like many people have kind of brought similarities, like wherein Indian officials have themselves said categorically that they Indian in why Indian state is not kind of adopting Israeli state in Israeli type separate colonies. And also this when officials started saying it, like the apprehension within population also have grown. And many other similarities that you can draw in terms of like how Indian Israel state have conducted in Palestine using like pellet shotguns, Kashmir as well, like since all these agitations in right after 2010, thousands of youngsters have like been fired upon through shotguns, and thousands of them have in like partially or fully got blinded in eyes. And also like different other similarity, as in security ban that was imposed on highways. uh, I guess some years back Indian side kind of categorically banned civilian movement on highways, and uh, and any other public movement on highways. So many other similarities, as in like in Palestine there's also this concept of Israel adopting human civilians as human shield. Kashmiris have also experienced and has witnessed for years like how Indian this security apparatus in the Kashmir have you have been using civilians as human shield.
نعم، بس أنا في هاي الحيثية بدي أقول إنه كمان التغير مش طبيعي. يعني أيام نهرو كانت الهند مختلفة تماما، كانت بتأيد حركات المقاومة، وكانت من دول عدم الانحياز، بتعرفي، مع عبد الناصر يوغوسلافيا السابقة. بس هلأ في تغير من الجانب اليساري للجانب اليميني، هي بتأيد لإسرائيل وضد المقاومة الفلسطينية، وموقفها يعني عجيب. الهند مع صارت دولة إمبريالية.
Okay, so Aitaf is adding like her contribution or her remark that at the times when India was part of non-allied movement and Nehru times that was actually for the people and for resistance, and now it is totally changing the policy after being from the non-allied movement to being like pro-imperialism and a tool for imperialism and an imperialist country itself. This is what the translation.
Definitely. And one point that I really wanted to emphasize on, like how people in Kashmir have been kind of focusing on the Indian side of bringing settled colonial project, as in in the form of infrastructure development. So ever since 2019, like there were major changes that have been brought in terms of there were around 1800 business projects have been signed in. So among them is Sajan, Jindal is one of the leading, who are quite open and supporter of, the abrogation 370 kind. So he has almost taken 9 acres of land in southern Kashmir. So when Indian side, on one side there is like serious repression on the locals, and which is in terms of there isn't any sort of an expression on speak, and journalists have been restricted not to write, and foreign journalists are not allowed to come to Kashmir, and local papers are talking about everything except Kashmir, and there isn't any sort of an like you can't publicly or even write something on WhatsApp, on any other social media. Like there were cases when people, in fact, young students were brought in by police, and they were uh, kind of questioned. In fact, one of the journalists who wrote recently for an international outlet, he was questioned, not only questioned, but he was asked that who were his friends, and their names were taken, and also about the children. In fact, if he had couple of young children, minors, in fact their names and school where they were been teaching, and all the information was taken, which basically kind of sends a message that you're not supposed to uh, talk about it, and be critical about it. And in fact, one of the key major activists who were working in Kashmir region, many of them have been arrested, notably Khurram Parvez, Irfan Miraj, and many other journalists remains imprisoned for many, in fact, ever since 2019-20 onwards. So that sums up the situation, as in it this India once were fighting against Britishers in the name of that they want a self determination. Now they have like kind of restricted it from Kashmiris, which is basically telling them like you accept that we have an agency, we can think about ourselves, we can we know how and what we imagine ourselves in future. And it's just not like Indian state who can just say like you're just mere numbers and casualties, and we are going to fight, and if you speak against the state.
أرقام.
نعم، تمام.
Yeah, also about one more similarity between which is basically with India, that the ideology that is kind of ruling now has has openly said that they're taking inspiration from Zionism that is there in Israel. And not just only that, what it does basically, the narrative that they have like controlled, because usually when you tell anyone outside India that what about India, they will most probably tell you that India is diverse, it has its land of colors, and it's famous for Bollywood and all. That's the narrative that Indian state for all these years, and in fact has developed internationally. But what this regime has kind of done, it has kind of exposed the internal fault lines that exist within the country, as in like Indians, Kashmiris have been saying to world and outsiders ever since like many decades that we have been treated differently. We have faced human right violation and different sort of exploitation. And if you're not going to speak for us right now, it's going to come back to you. And in fact, now everyone in India is facing the same treatment that Kashmiris faced long back, and it's coming back to them now. And in fact, within Indian, you would see like there are critics who are quite open, opposing the BJP, the far right Hindu national government that is there in the country. And also about like what it does, what Kashmir does to India is kind of, it consolidates their internal fault lines. I mean, India is quite unequal in terms of like there isn't like a sort of equality within the population. There are like small portion of people who have a lot of money, who basically are crony capitalists, and they have kind of sort of an agreement with the government. They are quite close to the government, and it is basically the capitalist regime, and it sells it to the world that Kashmir, it should be in a state of conflict, because if they're going to resolve it, what they're going to sell it to their own population. So that basically is a point like wherein like Kashmir brings them the excuse and the arguments wherein they have to sort of show it to their own population that we need more weapons because we have to fight against the Pakistan, because who is there doing stuff in Kashmir. And also about like it also sells their own ideology, which is supremacist. They don't see Muslims as even as equal. So this also resembles to the Israel's stand on Palestine. Like they don't see Palestinians as even. They don't even want to acknowledge them. I recently saw an official saying that Palestinians should stop telling to their own children that Israelis are their enemies. That also reflects on their mindset, like how Palestine, Israelis think about Palestinians. Same also applies to the BJP, and for that matter the RSS, the right wingers who are actually ruling the country. BJP is sort of an offshoot of the political dispensation, but it is the force behind BJP, which is basically all the grassroots network that is within the country, and in fact that is also internationally. You can't publicly speak about Kashmir outside India as well, because there is the RSS and all the network has a strong lobbying and network there as well. And in fact, it's just the Kashmiri wherein they can't face Kashmiri, because they can sell anything to anyone, but not to Kashmiris who have faced it firsthand. I mean, I am a generation who has grown up seeing things differently on television while witnessing things differently on street. That was the kind of pushed me to become the journalist, because I wanted to tell the story myself. The things that I saw on street, that was not being reflected on television and on the mainstream network channels, and in fact newspaper right now. You would see, even if you'll go across a mainstream newspaper right now, they'll not be very generous and very critical of the Indian dispensation, in fact, for the matter Indian state. So that basically reflects on their own credentials and own state of affairs in terms of selling it to their own population and to world outside that we are the largest democracy. Are they? That's quite.
فهو بيحكي إنه أصلا هي الحكومة.
So one last point, like before I'll sum up. So I just wanted to state that the Indian state has a control on the narrative on Kashmir, because the sort of a state surveillance that exists within the region. Couple of years back, there was Indian intelligence official, he himself said it to in the Hindu that within Kashmir, within a year, they have kind of 4 million phones were being tapped just a year back. So that basically reflects the sort of a surveillance that is under play, and how Indian state has maintained its strong grip on the ground, and not only on the ground but also on social media as well. So
Yeah.
most of the people who are quite critical of anything that Indian state is doing, they will not survive for long. So that is sort of an surveillance and sort of grip that Indian state has been able to, which was not the case before, like before 2019. Yeah. So if you have like questions, I can, because there's so much also like that I can speak on.
Yes, thank you, Omer. I think we will come back and open it up. I'm just going to give a little bit more of an overview on anti-imperialism in the Balkans before we open it up. Also, we are running behind, but I think we will go about 15 or so minutes longer. So if people can stay for another 30 minutes, I promise to be short, and then we can open it up to hear other people's thoughts. So thank you to everyone for their remarks on the situation in Palestine, in Iran, in Kashmir. I do want to shed a bit of light on some of the struggles and dynamics in the Balkans as it relates to imperialism. And I will just start a little bit focused on the ex-Yugoslavia region. I know that the Balkans is a much bigger region than just ex-Yugoslavia, of course, but it is where I have most of my knowledge surrounding it. So I will speak a little bit on that, on those dynamics, and then as we open it up, people from other countries in the Balkans and in the world, of course, please offer your own perspectives. So the one of the primary things I want to stress is seeing, as I said in my introduction, imperialism not as just direct military force or violence, but really the underlying structures and economic foundation that gives rise to imperialism and allows imperialism to flourish. So, of course, as many people know, in the 90s, this region experienced various genocides and wars. And since, the end of the 90s and in the early 2000s, with the formalization of so-called peace processes, the killing and bloodshed, and I say so-called, right, because the killing and bloodshed has stopped, but the tensions that gave rise to those wars and the suffering in this region have not stopped. So why is that? I think it's because these foreign powers, these imperialist powers that did intervene in this region, did not actually have any genuine interest in long-term peace, but more so in exploiting the divisions in this region that existed before they intervened, but exploiting those to make short-term profit. So, what do I mean by that? So, right, since the killing and the bloodshed has stopped, since the end of the 90s, there was massive privatization and basically opening up for foreign capital, foreign multinationals to buy up resources, factories, companies in this region, and as a result, be able to extract more profit from the labor of people in this region after the conflicts. But that's not necessarily, I'm not necessarily saying, right, that those companies, those largely state-owned companies, before they were privatized, before they were sold off to foreign multinationals, were operating really in people's interests. I actually think because they were not operating in people's interests, that opened up an opportunity for imperialist powers to utilize, right, those divisions, those weaknesses within the society in this region in ex-Yugoslavia to exert their own influence and advance their own interests. So I'll stop there, Summer, if you want to summarize really quick, and then I will wrap up. Okay, thank you, Summer. So yes, as I was saying, since the 90s, since the end of those wars, what have we seen? Privatization, right? And also the sharp increase in foreign direct investment. So as I was saying, the import of capital to create these, there's also this topic of special economic zones where companies don't have to pay any taxes. They have less regulations, just oppression and suffering of people who work within those special economic zones is of a particularly insidious nature. But also, we have the opening of factories where workers are, at the mercy of foreign management, whether or not they decide to close, whether or not they decide to pay them or not. I know that in Serbia, just recently, a German company announced that it was closing one of the biggest companies in Serbia because it was no longer profitable for them anymore. So, you have thousands of workers automatically out of work just due to the whims of this foreign company, as well as other companies that withhold payment. Sometimes they don't even pay workers what they earned, so-called, in the wages that are already very, very meager. So I think that these are all also expressions of imperialism, and that in order to fight the imperialist expression in war, we also have to fight the economic tentacles that these imperialists use to exert their own will onto other countries. Go ahead, Summer.
فهي عم تذكر
And yeah, just to conclude, I think that many speakers have spoken very well about, the divide and rule that it allows for the flourishing of imperialism. But I also think that in order for that to work, we have to, in order for that to work, usually it is based on a false binaries and lesser evilism that kind of tells us that only one of two things can be true, two things that are in tension with each other. For example, the wars in the 90s, the internal bases, the internal divisions, the internal actors, and the external actors, the external intervention are two separate things, right? Where I think that in essence, really, those two factors work in tandem, and one wouldn't be able to function without the other. So in terms of the imperialist kind of plunder of the region, that couldn't have been able to occur had the internal divisions within people and within internal solidarity within this region, within Yugoslavia, had that not been on weak footing, the plunder of the region and the advancement of imperialist interests also wouldn't have happened. So I think that we have to just, I think, zoom out when we're talking about imperialism to really see the complex nature of how these things are able to be accomplished, and do obviously our own work internally, and work on our own inter-community solidarity, while also opposing external forces that seek to exacerbate the divisions that exist amongst people. So I'll leave it there, and then we can open it up after Summer translates.
نعم
هذا إشي كمان لازم نتطرق له.
نعم
Okay, thank you, Summer. I know they have to go soon, so thank you so much for your help. And I want to now open it up for the next 20 or so minutes for whoever is available to stay. I know it's been a long day if people have been on calls on the other panels as well. But really curious for other people's thoughts, their experiences, their ideas for their respective countries. If we didn't talk about them, I just want to open up the space for others to say their own thoughts.
Anna, is it possible if I can ask a question?
Absolutely.
Sure. I I'm I'm kind of curious, and apologies if I'm going a bit off topic, but I think it is kind of in topic because we've seen for the past, oh goodness, since November, the Serbian student blockades that have been happening, and um, there was a recent conversation on Twitter, and I can't remember the person who said it. anyway, long story short, basically, this individual, I think you may know this person, but anyway, they were making discrepancies between, Serbian nationalism of the 90s versus some sort of the Serbian nationalism within, I guess, the student movement, the uses of the Serbian flag, etc. And I was I was kind of interested in this dichotomy because within their tweets they talked about, well, Serbian nationalism isn't as jingoistic or antagonistic as it was in the 90s because obviously when students from Novi Pazar marched into Niš, then, this was during Ramazan and then there was Ramazan, iftar given. So obviously like we've kind of like let bygones be bygones, that sort of thing. And I want to know exactly in relation to that because then you have, let's say, flags that are used within in like a lot of the big protests that basically say like Kosovo is Serbia, etc. So I want to know, like, I mean, I know that the Serbian student blockade is a huge like umbrella. It's like there are many different factions like with everything else, but I want to know exactly like how this relates to discourses around sort of that nationalism, but also in relation to Palestine, because I know that maybe perhaps it's only the Novi Pazar student blockade that has done a lot more in relation to Palestine, but maybe I'm wrong and maybe there have been others. So
Yes. I don't know if Sana's wants to answer. I don't know if she left, but anyways. Okay, well, first of all, in Palestine, actually, no, it hasn't only been Novi Pazar. There have been other faculties that have released statements in particular regarding the Serbian state's selling of weapons to Israel. So there has been some movement generally. I mean, not as much as there should be, of course, but still not just in Novi Pazar. So on that point, but on the other point, I mean, it's interesting. I think it's a very important contradiction, right? Because I think many students many students don't have the same that type of visceral bigotry that was kind of fomented during the war, but they were raised in environments and hearing those narratives. So I think on some level they do want to, cross interreligious, interethnic lines in solidarity, against the government and so on and so forth. And so there are positive elements of that, like you're saying, with the kind of struggle with to have Ramadan and work with Novi Pazar students and who are Muslim majority, Bosniak majority. So I think those are positives in terms of that generation not growing up necessarily during the wars, but at the same time, there's a lot of indoctrination that still happens, even if they don't have like visceral bigoted views towards other ethnicities in the region. But in school, taught very inaccurate, unobjective understandings of the history of the region and Serbia's role in the wars, and of course Serbian colonialism. So those things, unless there's a concerted educational campaign to clarify them, they're not going to spontaneously go away. So yeah, that's just in short. And I think that there's some faculties that are more progressive, some that are, more, unfortunately still have a lot of that chauvinist ideology. So yeah, as you said, it's a very big umbrella movement. There's a lot of divisions within it. So I hope that was somewhat helpful. Yes, go ahead. Soko.
Hello, everybody. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So, I'm Sokol from Albania, from the Palestine Alir community and Solidarity Albania. And I just wanted to add to the picture that you laid out about ex-Yugoslavia, since Albania is quite close to ex-Yugoslavia, and we had a very, I would say, a like sort of evolution throughout these years. So as many of you might know, Albania changed its politics during the 90s when he left the communist regime for the so-called democracy and pluralism. And in these 35 years of evolution, I would say, we are still in a transit point, as our politicians call it. And to connect it with the whole conversation that we're having here, all of a sudden, after all the things that have happened after the 7th of October, the picture is becoming ever more clear to see what's going on. Like, you can see the different forces which are starting to control different sectors of our economy, of our politics. So all of a sudden, it's becoming clear that this is not really a struggle of the people on their own. This is more like a struggle of classes. This is more like a struggle of people who cannot really assert their own power by elections and by their politicians. We can see now goods and properties being taken away by our own state in the name of development. And we can see basically losing public spaces and public goods. And we can see political decisions being made in the name of the people, which are not being consulted with the people, as, for example, our partnership with Israel, because as you guys know, our state is a very close partner, I would say, with Israel, even though we are trying to both sides it by also saying a good word for Palestine at the same time. So I just wanted to put this in the middle there, just to complete the picture of what's going on and how interconnected these all conflicts are in the bigger scheme of things, because we can see that imperialism has very, very deep roots and has very complicated ties to all these places, and has ways to manipulate power and economics and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the, states' relations and unconditional support of Israel has been very eye-opening. It's for many people across the world, right? Because I think the majority of people are opposed to what Israel is doing. And so when they see their governments completely ignoring the will of the people, it really tells you, it's an indicator, well, what does that say about the overall functioning of the government if it's, not listening while a genocide is happening? Is it really going to listen to our demands, our wishes, and in other aspects of our societies? I think clearly no. So it's been, just one kind of door or gateway into understanding the nature of our states and whose interests are really at the helm of them. Yes, Sanaz?
Yeah, and I just to add to that, also in Albania, there have been a lot of partnerships with the CIA in relation to allowing the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran to reside in Albania. I think they have their, I guess, compound or something somewhere in Albania. And this is an organization that began in the 1970s in Iran, and then they were opposed, obviously, to the Shah, the Pahlavi monarchy. And then when the revolution happened in 1979, they came out against the Islamic Republic, and then moved their operations to Iraq. And yeah, I mean, there's a long story of that. But the CIA has been propping up the People's Mujahideen Organization as sort of an organization that, if there was regime change in Iran that was instigated by the CIA or, let's say, Israel or whomever, they can quickly put these people in power. And that's really, like, very dangerous, because if you ask any Iranian inside Iran, they would never want to have the People's Mujahideen Organization leading the country. It'd be like just the most awful choice of many.
Yeah, thank you, Sanaz. I am very uneducated on that history, so we'll need to look more into that. But want to also see if anyone else has some further thoughts. Don't be shy. Not all at once. Well, we are over anyways, so if people are feeling pretty good and ready to wrap up, then maybe we can close here. What do you think, Ashik?
We can close.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you to the 13 people that made it through the end. It's not unnoticed. Appreciate it. And I hope that we can continue to stay in touch. I think we all have your emails, so we will follow up for further conversations. Thank you to Omer and Etaf. Shukran. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Really happy to be here with all of you and look forward to continuing the struggle against imperialism. Death to imperialism. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you very
Take
much.
care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Take care of yourself. Have a lovely rest of your weekend.
You too, Sanaz. Talk
All right
soon.
then.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.
Okay, thank you, Omer. Shukran, shukran, shukran. Etaf. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much for you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Amina.
For all of you. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Amina. Thank you, everyone. Talk soon.